Hello, beautiful people. Today I want to share with you everything that I read in February. I had a very large reading month. I usually read like 7 or 8 books in a month. And this month I attempted to read 10 books. You'll find out all about that very shortly. The first book that I should just mention, I mean briefly, is a DNF. And this is a heartbreaking DNF for me because I ended up DNFing an Ann Patchett book, Run. I adore Ann Patchett. I love her as an author. I've read 2 other books by her that I've given like 5 stars, some of my all-time favorite books. And there was just something about this book that I just couldn't connect with. This is about a Boston father who's had a very long career in politics. And it's about him with his 3 sons. There is a snowstorm after a kind of lecture speech kind of thing that they have all attended. And they go out in the storm and there is an accident that relates to them and also a single mother with her young daughter. I found it to be very slow, even though it's action-packed in the beginning because there's this accident. I found myself struggling to connect with the characters and struggling to want to find out more about what happened between these characters and their past. And so I ended up DNFing it. I gave it a good shot. I think it was like 100 pages. And then I was like, you know what? I want to read something else. And so I did. Now, as you know, I have created new categories. I don't do the whole like 2 stars, 5 stars thing anymore. I have silly new categories that I hope that you will enjoy. We're going in first with The Vile. These are the Vile books that I read in February. Are they actually horrific? No, but I didn't enjoy them. And I got frustrated reading them. And so to me, I'm throwing them under the Vile. The first Vile book that I read in February is The Overnight Guest by Heather Goodenkoff. This is about a woman who is a writer. She's a true crime writer after having a horrible history herself, connected with true crime in any case. She goes to this kind of remote-ish home to write her next book. She's only there with her dog, and suddenly, out in the snow, she finds a young boy. It is like a wild snowstorm. She doesn't understand how he got there, and she brings him in. I found it to be quite silly at times. There were lots of twists in this book, but I saw almost all of them coming. And some of the twists that I saw coming, I was like, oh, please don't let it be that. And then it would be a twist that I found quite silly and kind of ruined the book for me. So I really didn't enjoy it, sadly. I liked the setting, the ambiance of the snow, but that was about it. Another Vile book that I read in February is My Darling Husband by Kimberly Bell. Sadly, this didn't work for me. This is about a woman who gets home one day with her 2 kids in tow, and as she is like getting out of her car, she's essentially attacked by a man wearing a ski mask, and they're being held hostage in their own home. And she needs to reach out to her husband to get money to give to this guy. I found this very much like a popcorn thriller, not dark at all. It all takes place in one day, and that doesn't always work for me. Sometimes it does, but it's hard to keep your attention when it's like that. So I just found a little bit frustrating and a bit boring, if I'm honest. At the end, I was like, okay. I was not blown away. I was not invested. Obviously, I wanted the kids to survive this hostage situation, but I just wasn't all that scared. And like breaking and entering and home invasion is one of my big fears. So this should have worked better for me because it is a big fear, you know? Anyway, that's okay. What are you gonna do? Moving on to the tolerable. So these books are books that were good, they were enjoyable, but just they weren't something to write home about. I'm not gonna remember it years down the line. Do you know what I mean? So the only tolerable book that I have on my list for February is 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton. This is a book that takes place all in one day. Actually, it might be all one morning, in which a school shooter arrives at this kind of remote school. There is a blizzard going on. You follow multiple points of view of people trying to survive, teachers, you follow parents. You're trying to essentially keep the children safe, and find out who is doing this, what their motive is. You also follow a police detective trying to find out the motive and all of those kinds of things. This is, because it's something, again, that took place all in one day, I found it felt a little bit long. And this might just be a me thing with that kind of structure of book, that I might just find it a little bit frustrating. I do like that this spoke to racism, like inherent racism of society. It takes place in the UK, I think, and I really liked that it spoke to that. It definitely didn't end up being like a popcorn thriller or anything along those lines, because it had some depth to it, which is what I really appreciated about this book. I would recommend it. I just wasn't like completely blown away, you know? Moving on to the splendid, I actually had quite a few books that I thought were really good and really interesting and are going to stick with me for a while. The first, oh my goodness, was The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters. I have not read a Sarah Waters in so long, and this was absolutely wonderful. This takes place in 1922, and we follow a woman who lives with her mother. Her father has died and left them not a lot of money. Her brothers both died in the war, in the First World War, and her and her mother want to stay in the house that they've lived with her whole life, but they decide that they need to take in residents. They need to take in paying guests in order to stay. And so they decide to take in a young couple who rent a couple of rooms upstairs. It is about the relationship between Frances, our main character, who's lived in this house all her life, and then the new couple that has moved in, and in particular Lillian. This is a really wonderful romance story. I will say, because you know I have no heart, there's lots of, you know, romance and leaving little notes to one another and stuff that I find it a bit trying. And just like, I don't know why I have no heart when it comes to romantic love, but I really just struggle with it. In any case, so that went on for a little too long, but what's so cool about this book is that, like, a little over halfway through, it flips and turns into a mystery where someone in this house dies, and the rest of them have to sort out what happened. I'm not going to ruin anything. It flips, and I loved it when it flipped on its head and what that did to the characters in the story. And it tested their characters, it tested their relationships with one another. I really enjoyed The Paying Guests. So happy that I read that. Next is a new-ish thriller release, What Lies in the Woods by Kate Marshall. This is a really cool book about a girl who goes home. She goes home to see her best friends that she grew up with. They've been best friends since kindergarten, and they're all gathering together because when they were, I think they were 11 or something, they were quite young, they were attacked in the woods. And the person that they believed to be the attacker recently died. However, there is a lot of speculation that he actually was not the attacker at all. He was a murderer of many other people, but he did not attack them. And so we meet these characters getting together and going, did we remember correctly what actually did happen? And we follow one main character who is the person going home and seeing these people and trying to reestablish these connections with these girls that she had been very, very close to when they were little, and still remain close to some, or one in particular in her adulthood, but just struggling with memory of this time. And it's a small town and everybody knows each other. And I really like that. There's also a podcast element to this. And the podcast host is actually the one who is questioning whether it was actually that murderer who attacked them or not. I thought it was really good. There were lots of twists and turns. I ended up really liking all of the characters. I thought they were very distinct from one another, which I enjoyed, and I would definitely read another Kate Marshall book in the future. I think this is her first adult book. She's written YA before. So I was pleasantly surprised by that one. Next is a book that everyone and their mother has read, Spare by Prince Harry. I listened to this on audio. I knew I wanted to listen to it on audio because he narrates it himself, and so the day that it was released, I put my name in the laundry list of people through my library, and I finally came in and I read it. I'm glad that I read it. Prince Harry goes into all of the details of his growing up, essentially. In the spotlight, he speaks at length about his mother and how so heartbreakingly, he believed that she was not dead for years, and he thought that she was in hiding and that she would come and see him at some point. And it took him many years to realize that she had actually passed away. So that was quite sad. And it does go into detail about his military history, which I knew he was in the military. I didn't know the extent of what he did in the military, and it was very interesting. And then, of course, all of the stuff with Meghan and the families having a hard time, and essentially him having to leave. At the end of the day, I understood why he left. I probably would have left as well, if I'm being honest. I did find it interesting to see how much toxic masculinity existed within this royal family, the men within the royal family, and also in Prince Harry himself. I don't think he may see it or not, but probably because of how he's raised. I'm not saying anything against hunting. I am not a hunter. But I don't have anything against hunting, but there's this toxic masculinity of when he was speaking about his relationship with hunting, and how it started as a child. It felt really strange. I also found it strange that the men in this family were never really allowed or willing to share their feelings with each other. No feelings, no hugs, or few of those. One thing that I was pleasantly surprised with was he does speak to the pockets of kindness that he had between him and his brother and him and his father, especially with Prince Charles. That was kind of nice to see. I do think that there are two sides to every story. In this case, there are multiple sides to this story, and we're only getting his. I would love for the rest of the royal family to tell their story of how, they've experienced being in this very strange position that really doesn't exist in most other corners of the world. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. I would not want to be part of that family. And some of the stuff that they argued about, particularly like William and Harry and Kate and Meghan, some of the stuff was quite petty, like quite petty. And there were a few things that I was like, I don't know why you need to bring this up in this book, but I mean, they're just different from the rest of us. I will just say that. I liked it. I felt for him at the end of the day, but I kind of feel for all of them to a certain extent. Moving on to another splendid book, Foster by Claire Keegan. This is a tiny little novella that is so lovely. This is about a young girl in Ireland. Her parents are quite busy with a very large family, and we meet her at the beginning, where we meet her when she is arriving to a small farm with her father, and she meets a couple who take her in essentially for the summer, and she just blossoms. It's a very quiet book. It feels like, in some ways, like when Anne meets Marilla and Matthew in Anne of Green Gables. It felt like that kind of nurturing relationship, which I really enjoyed. It's quiet. This would be a great book to read in the summer. I kind of wish that I had read it in the summer. It was so atmospheric, and you just want them to stay together forever. I love how Claire Keegan makes you care about characters in such a short period of time. She did that in Small Things Like These, and then again here in Foster. Like, this woman can write. I will read anything that she comes out with. And the last splendid book that I read in February was The Promise by Damon Galgut. I hope I'm saying his name right. This book takes place at different periods of time. It takes place in South Africa, and we meet a family at multiple funerals. The first funeral is the mother's funeral. She has gone back to her Jewish roots, I believe, and she has promised the home that she lives in to a Black woman that she essentially grew up with. They were very, very close. She promised it in her will. This was her wishes, but the family defy this, all except one of the sisters, one of her daughters, who repeatedly says, no, the house is supposed to go to this woman. And that's essentially the theme of the story, this promise that has not been fulfilled year after year after year. But what's so interesting is that it's also about the promise of life and the struggles that so many of these characters deal with in terms of the promise of life. The father is incredibly, like, sternly committed to his religion. And it's the promise of the afterlife. In that case, there's a sister who is very committed and who only really sees values in her looks. It's the promise of, you know, how far you can get by your beauty. And then the brother is let down over and over again by success and not being able to succeed and wanting to be a successful man. And so it's so interesting that they all struggle with these promises of life. And you see them struggling with that at all of these different funerals. I really enjoyed that structure. I found the characters to be sometimes very frustrating because there's not a lot of likable characters except like one person. So that was frustrating at times, but that is okay. I did enjoy it. Are you ready for the favorite? There can only be one book that is my favorite book of the month, and this month was absolutely How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This is about a woman who's essentially a single mom. Her parents live in a different state than her, and they die very suddenly in a car accident. And she has to go home to sort out their affairs. But she also has to contend with her extremely annoying brother. She does not like this man. She doesn't even really talk to him. The only reason that they're talking at this time is because their parents just died and they need to sort out the affairs together. Now, they enter the house and it is creepy from the get-go. There are dolls and puppets everywhere. This is one of those stories that, like, if you are terrified of scary dolls, like Annabelle freaks you out, this might not be the story for you. Or maybe it's the perfect story if you want to dive a little deeper into that fear. I loved it because yes, it was creepy, but also it was so funny. And that's what I love about Grady Hendrix the most, is that he writes these horror stories with so much, it's so funny. Like, I genuinely laugh my way through his books. I just love his weird, warped mind. So I just thoroughly enjoyed this. I loved the characters, the dynamics between the siblings, these weird puppets that were creepy beyond belief, but also humorous in their own way. I really loved it. So glad that I read another Grady Hendrix. I think I still have 2 of his that I haven't read yet, so I have more Grady Hendrix in my future. Those are all of the books that I read in February. Let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite book of February? I would love to know, and I will talk with you very, very soon. Bye, guys.